Welcome to Remote First Innovators, the podcast for leaders who are scaling companies built for the modern world. We sit down with founders and experts in distributed work to explore how they've broken down barriers and solved the real-world challenges of growing and running remote teams. Each episode dives into practical strategies for onboarding, IT, security, compliance, and everything it takes to build a thriving distributed business. No fluff, no theory, just what works when your team is everywhere and operations never stop. Here are your hosts, Robert Phelps and Jake Gump.
Welcome to another episode of Remote First Innovators. Today's guest is someone who actually caught my attention, and not because of the work, just because of the work he's doing, but because of the way he thinks about people, culture, and building something that actually matters. He's a PhD engineer, 5-time founder, and the co-founder of a medical device startup that started fully remote from day one, doing what most people would call impossible, building hard tech for multiple states with a distributed team. Please welcome to the show, Bill Walker.
Thank you, Jake. I appreciate it.
Yeah, let's kick things off with your origin story. Most startups that go remote are, you think of software companies. You can push code from anywhere, but you're building a medical device, real hardware, life-saving hardware. Walk us through how Boundless Science got started and how in the world you made remote work with that type of, kind of complexity.
Yeah, so the company really starts during COVID. So this was it was probably in the summer of 2020. And I got a phone call from my good friend, Andy Jones. So Andy and I have been friends since we were undergraduates in college. We actually founded a fraternity together. So we are founders going way back. And Andy called me up during COVID and he said, "Look, Bill, this is probably the greatest public health crisis that we will ever see in our lifetime. People are dying. Nobody knows what to do. The treatments that they're applying are things that have been around for 40, 50, 60 years with almost no innovation. You're an inventor and I'm an inventor. You are a founder and I'm a founder. I think we have a moral obligation to do something about this." And at the time, I was the Matson Family Director of Entrepreneurship for Duke Engineering, where I was running multiple programs, including a scholarship program for a pile of undergraduates. I was stretched very, very thin, and I had 3 teenage daughters at home at the time. And I said, "Andy, this is great, and I wish you luck, but I'm just too busy to take this on." And Andy, we were on a Zoom call, I think, and he kind of looked at me and he was like, "Come on, Bill, people are dying. Really? You're too busy?" And he was right. He was absolutely right, and I was wrong in that case. And so I heard him out. I heard about the problems that he was thinking about, that he felt that we should attack, and we decided that we would kick this thing off. So at the beginning, there was actually a third founder. There was a guy Andy knew that he had worked with previously, and the 3 of us founded the company. But this was my 4th company at the time, and I had some real unpleasant co-founder interactions, and I just wasn't going to go through that again. So I said, "Look, I'm going to do this, guys, but I have a couple ground rules. Number 1, equity vests. I don't care if you're a founder or an employee or whatever you are, your equity vests, and it vests over 4 years. Because we're founders and we got to start hard from day one, we'll vest monthly from day one." And they sort of said, "I don't know about that, Bill." And I said, "Well, if you don't like that one, wait till the next one comes. The next one is that 2 of us can vote the third out of the company at any time without cause. We can just decide that person's not good to work with anymore and they're out." And that's when they really said, "What, are you crazy?" And I said, "Hey, this is okay. Like, you guys don't have to sign on for this. These are the rules that I have to be able to sleep at night because of the history that I have. If you don't want to do that, you found the company and I will wish you well. I will cheer from the sidelines. But if you want me in on it, that's what has to happen." So everybody agreed. We incorporated. We got things up and running. In my home lab, I built our first prototype, and I'll tell you in a minute about what we were trying to do. We kind of were off to the races. We wrote a grant to the National Institutes of Health. We got a perfect score. As far as I know, we were the only grant in the nation that year of any type to any entity that got a perfect score. We went back to my investors from my last company, and we raised a very small seed round, and kind of we were off and running. Oh, and by the way, the third founder was voted off the island 7 months after we founded the company.
Oh my God.
So that was the beginning. And I should point out, because this is your podcast, I live in Durham, North Carolina. Andy lives in Lancaster, Pennsylvania. So we founded the company with, I don't know what, 500 miles between us.
Yeah. So what was the first moment where you thought, okay, this is actually going to work? And then what was the first moment where you were like, we might be in trouble here?
Yeah. So, I mean, I'll start with we might be in trouble here. And that was about 3 months in. Founder number 3 started just getting really nasty towards Andy. He had a relationship with Andy. He didn't have one with me, but he just started to get really nasty. And he didn't, he felt that as a founder, a whole bunch of deference was due to him. And I'm the kind of guy, like, I respect everybody and I defer to no one, if that makes sense, right? Like I want to be kind, I want to be considerate, I want to be friendly and courteous to everybody. But ideas are ideas. I don't care who they came from. They could be wrong, they could be right. The beautiful thing about the kind of work that we do is the universe gets to decide, right? The physics works or it doesn't work. The biology works or it doesn't work. It doesn't care whose mouth that idea came out of. It's just how it is. And this guy, he seemed to feel that he was owed a certain amount of deference, and that when he said jump, people should jump. And the challenge was that Andy had a long-standing relationship with him and was trying to make it work. And I was looking at it and I just said, this is a guy who might be great when he is a player on the team, but when he's supposed to be owning the team, his personality doesn't seem to work for that. And so I saw bad signs very quickly. It took longer for Andy to realize that if we had that third founder around, it just wasn't going to work out. So that was sort of the biggest risk that we had. I think it was human. It wasn't technical. And I'll tell you in a minute about the technical risks, and you'll wonder how crazy I am that I could say that it was a human risk. But when did I think things would go really well? I wasn't naive enough to think that a good grant would mean we'd win. I wasn't naive enough to think that some investors signing on to us would mean we would win. But what I found was, even though Andy and I had been friends forever, we had never really worked well together. And I don't mean we hadn't worked well together. We hadn't worked together, period. We'd advised each other on our different ventures, but we hadn't worked closely. And what I found was he cares deeply about success, and he has enough humility to not care who gets credit for it, whether anybody gets credit for it. And to me, that's kind of the magic, right? You have people who desperately want to solve the problem, desperately want to get it right, and nobody is stepping in the front of the room demanding credit for everything. And I think in that kind of an environment, you can do amazing things.
For folks that may not know, you used a term hard tech with me in the last conversation. And, can you break that down into plain terms? And what is that? What is hard tech? What makes it different from, say, like building a SaaS app?
Yeah, absolutely. So when you build out a software system, your world is defined by the bounds of what a computer can do, what a network can do, and how you're going to interact with your human customer. But when you're building out hard tech, you may have all those constraints, but you fundamentally have constraints of physics, maybe constraints of biology. You're building stuff that interacts with the physical world, and not in a loose way, but in fundamental ways. Think about, SpaceX is a great example of a hard tech company, right? They build rocket ships, for God's sake. If you think about companies like Medtronic makes medical devices that are implanted in people or that sustain life in the hospital. You think about auto manufacturers, you think about the people who make the physical stuff in our world. The kind of work that we're doing is invention heavy. And, I really appreciate the very kind introduction, Jake. And I think underneath a lot of what I do, I really see myself as and I hold, I don't know, 35, 40 patents right now. I lost track a while ago. But a lot of what I'm doing is I'm looking for ways to solve a problem using physics or chemistry that other people haven't pieced together quite in that way. So we build prototypes continuously. Our team right now is about to buy its third 3D printer, and those things are running almost 24/7. So our engineers are designing parts, printing parts, testing parts, integrating them into the system, finding out what went wrong, tearing it down, designing new parts, printing new parts, integrating into the system, testing it, tearing it down. That's very different. In a software sense, you're doing that, but it's not messy. You're doing a new build, you're making some changes to the code base, you're seeing how they interact, but you're not working with thousands or tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands of dollars worth of supplies and equipment to do that testing in the same way. We work with a fluid in some of our experiments that costs on the order of $1 a milliliter. Okay, so a teaspoon is 10 milliliters. So if you spill a teaspoon of this stuff on the floor, you just dumped $10. When you drop, when you drop a teacup full, it's a whole lot more than that. So, we just operate with a different set of constraints and a different set of problems.
Why does that make, when you're talking about the hard tech and you're talking about like, certain industries, for you, why does that make running a distributed team that much more challenging?
Yeah. So, for us, we are designing, building, and testing prototypes continuously. So we sit down Friday afternoon, a whole all hands meeting, and we lay out the plan for the coming week. And the coming week is going to be, these are the changes to the prototype that we're going to make. We're going to test subsystems on Monday and Tuesday. We're going to integrate on Wednesday. We're going to test an integrated system on Thursday. And then Friday, we're going to figure out what happened and what to do next. That's kind of the typical week for us. And imagine, so let me walk you through who's on our team and what their roles are. So I'm the chief technology officer. I sit here in Durham in our lab in downtown Durham. Andy, the CEO, sits up in Lancaster, Pennsylvania. He comes down every 2 or 3 weeks. Tim Higgins, our head of engineering, lives in Charlottesville, Virginia. Tess Cunningham, our chief administrative officer, who handles all of our back office logistics, she lives out in Colorado. And then we've got our COO, Sona Patel Raman, who lives here, and then our engineering team, who's here as well. So when we're thinking about a prototype, Tim is up in Charlottesville. He's doing running the CAD, making the designs. He's sending files down here for review, for a design review for our whole team, which we'll do over Slack. Then we print it here locally, and then there's always modifications to assemble it. And then the experiment is actually run by people here, but Tim needs to know what's going on. So there'll be video calls 10 times during that experiment. Somebody's got their iPhone right up to the device looking at it and saying, you see that, Tim? Look at that little artifact there. What do you think that's about? What are we going to do to unwind that? So when you're building a new thing that nobody's ever built before, not surprising, it doesn't work the way you think it's going to work. And it's that unwinding of what did you see? What does it mean? And Tim's not here to see it all the time. And, I'm here, but I'm doing my own thing. So it is all the challenges of keeping a team integrated, except you just have to be so much more intentional about, you got to show me what's going on. You got to capture video. You got to capture photos. You got to document what you did, because I can't just walk in the lab and ask you 5 questions fluidly. So it changes the workflow a bit, just more than a bit.
Yeah, let's talk tools. You mentioned Slack, and you kind of mentioned some of the process there. So let's say that someone finishes an experiment in a lab. You're sharing the information through Slack, right? But is there any other tools or let's say leadership review night, right? I mean, basic documentation habits, right? Stuff like that. Is there any other things that you can cover there?
Our core tool set really, shared tools are Slack and Notion. So when you're preparing to do a design, an experiment, whatever, you're going to write up the whole protocol in Notion. You're gonna write it up. You're gonna ideally review it with somebody if it's a new thing that we've never done before. If it's something we've done a lot, no need. But you're gonna write it up. You're gonna put in all of your detailed results in there. It's almost like your lab notebook, except it's shared. We all see it. We can all add comments to it and review it. Slack is going to be real time communication. It's going to be, hey, print this part out for me as soon as the printer is available. It's going to be, hey, team, I just finished that experiment. Results are up in Notion, but let me give you the thumbnail summary of what we saw. We do a lot of leadership team, I would say, lightweight decision making. Hey, I've got a job candidate. I'd love for you all to look at them. Our leadership team meets twice a week for about an hour, and that's where we do our really deliberative decision making. So Slack is kind of our asynchronous, like chattering all the time. Notion is where we keep our records. So we really don't want people to keep records in Slack. We want record keeping in Notion and deliberation and conversation in Slack. Those are our shared tools. We also have a Google Drive like everybody else in the world, and that's where a lot of our sort of long-term documents live that have to be shared with the outside world, because Notion isn't great for sharing with the outside world. And then our leadership team in particular all uses Perplexity very heavily. So if your audience doesn't know Perplexity, Perplexity is a AI company built largely by PhDs to support PhD level research. So where Perplexity is different from some of the other tools that people use and hear about is when I ask Perplexity a deep technical question, it doesn't just give me an answer, it cites all the literature it used to get that answer. And I can send it off to go read scientific papers. I can pull in a scientific paper and say, hey, I'm really interested in the methodology they used. Can you find other papers where this methodology was used? Can you find critiques of it? Can you sort of tear it apart? I was a professor for about a dozen years of my career, and I had really brilliant grad students. I use Perplexity a little bit the way I used my first year grad students. I have a question, I would say, hey, go find me papers on this and come back and summarize them for me. And just like those really smart first year grad students, Perplexity often misses the summary. They kind of miss the plot a little bit. Not often, but I would say 20% of the time. They'll come back and they'll say, oh, well, this tells me you should absolutely be able to do this. And if it doesn't sort of pass my BS meter, I'll dig a little deeper and I'll find that, yeah, they misread that. They misinterpreted it. But that's true of every human being I've ever worked with. I've worked with really brilliant people in my career, and we all misunderstand things. So I don't look to AI to be a perfect problem solver. I look for it to be a collaborator. And I think about it that way, an imperfect collaborator.
I know the AI entrepreneurs that are listening, the people feel like I try to ask AI because I get so many people. It's such an interesting topic, but a lot of people say the AI is only as good as the prompt, right? And do you feel like that the prompts that you're using are, do you have to be really, really specific, more so than what you would with the grad student, or do you feel like they pick up on what you're talking about pretty quickly? And then I have a follow-up question for you after you get done with that.
Yeah, I think you do have to. Again, I go at it like I'm talking to a smart human being who doesn't know what I know. And so my prompts can be quite lengthy. And I find that the better job I do of providing context, the better it is. Now, one of the nice things about Perplexity is I've given it background as to who I am. It knows I'm a PhD biomedical engineer. So that sets a certain level of context. I have threads set up where I've asked questions in a related space where I've got 20 or 30 cycles. So at some point, it starts to actually learn what the real problem is I'm trying to address. But yeah, no, prompts are everything. And it's a little bit like I always was sort of saddened when I watched people just a few short years ago who didn't know how to write a Google query properly. That they didn't know how to use logical connectors, like the A and B, not C, and that just blew people's brains. And they were like, I can't find anything on Google, and I could find it in 30 seconds. You have to know how to talk to the tool, and you have to set the boundaries properly. So yeah, no, prompts matter a lot, and context matters a lot. And that's a lot of what I'm doing with my prompts. I'm giving context. This is why I care.
I feel like in the last 90 days, we're having this conversation at the 1st of March here, but um, I feel like in the last, I'll say 6 months, the prompts, the AIs have gotten significantly better. They're starting to make more leaps. I can think 2 years ago when I started, messing with ChatGPT and Grok and some of those others, and Gemini specifically, how they were, having to learn a lot, and they get the context as you continue to speak with them. They pick up on you. They develop, you as a persona and what you expect from them. And it's almost hard for me to even think about going to another tool after being with one tool for so long. Uh, it's so because even if you ask it to train another AI, it's still not going to bring the whole context along with it.
I think that's a great point, Jake. One of the things that has annoyed me endlessly with AI is you write a prompt and you get a response that says, I am now prepared to give you a comprehensive answer to your question. And I'm like, no, you're not. No, you're not. You don't know enough. You can't possibly. And it seems like in the last few months, it's quit saying that. And it may be because I yelled at it enough times and I broke its will, but or maybe they're just getting better. I don't know which, but it's been a relief because I got really annoyed by that.
Yeah. There's, I have been impressed with, they're getting rid of some of the notions of AI. There's sometimes where you can just tell when I've had sometimes where people include the questions at the bottom when they reply to an email, and stuff. You're just like, oh, they're literally copying and pasting, in here. But AI is something that I think will continue to benefit us long term. Some industries more than others. I know data analytics seems to be one of those areas being hit right now. Where do you feel like it's going to impact your business and for your specific industry?
Yeah. So, let me rewind just a little bit. I think the obvious is what it's done to code developers, right? So when I started at Duke in 2016, within a couple years, I was seeing kids coming out of Duke with an undergraduate degree getting, well over $100,000 starting offers, with a CS degree coming out of undergrad with a couple of internship experiences. Now those kids are not getting internships, not to mention jobs. That's AI. That's what AI's done. I just started my 5th company, which will be a software as a service company, and I used AI to write all the code. I wrote maybe 50 lines of code in my 5,000 line code base. And AI did all of it. And what I find is the better the prompt, the better the code. No surprise. What I'm finding is AI is this incredible accelerator for me to learn new things. So, I've been blessed in my career to do a variety of different things and work in a variety of different technologies. So I have kind of baseline vocabulary about a lot of things. I can take that baseline vocabulary into AI and I can do a deep dive into a topic that I started the day knowing nothing about. And I can walk away with an hour of really carefully curated searching and reading and feel like I have, not mastery of it, but I understand the basics. That makes me think about the leap I saw in going from going to the library to read things to being able to Google things. It's the same scale of improvement. And so what I think we're going to see is good researchers, good investigators, good designers are going to be able to move fast into new areas in a way that couldn't before. Obviously, we're going to see AI support coding in a really incredible way. But there's other things. Like last week, I wanted to look at some data, and I knew the kind of graph I want, and it wasn't an easy thing to create in Excel. And I would have created it in MATLAB back in the day, but I don't have a MATLAB license anymore. So I opened up VS Code, and I have Copilot, and I wrote a 1-paragraph prompt of the kind of graph I wanted. And the damn thing made a better graph than the one I asked for. It made a deviation, and it color coded something differently than what I asked for, and it was actually much better. And it wrote, 200 lines of code in a minute and a half, and I just plugged in my data, and there it was, visualized just beautifully. So it's just this incredible lever that if you've got the right knowledge, you can just make things happen so much faster. I look more broadly at what's going to happen, and I think there's a there's actually an AI war going on right now that nobody is seeing in the sciences, where first of all, there's a massive number of AI written papers now that are getting sent out to journals, and they're not high quality. They're not good. They let people kick out papers faster. That's a problem. But the battle that I see that's coming is AI written grants getting reviewed by AI reviewers. Um, so if you think about you're running an academic lab and you're living off of grants, and shots on goal matter. If you can have AI help you write an extra grant per cycle and get that out there, then you got to feel like your odds are better. And then the flip side is reviewers are going to have more and more grants to review, so they're going to lean on AI more heavily to do the reviews. And I actually don't mind it in the sense that if you're using it to really assess, is this novel? Is this a thing that isn't in the literature before? But there will be a spectrum of people. Some people who use it to really up their game, to do a better job of reviewing, and some people who use it to avoid doing a good job at all. And that's where we're just going to drown.
I think to me, an AI, there's going to be a pendulum swing, because when we find that it does our weaknesses really well, that helps us bring it to a certain level. But at some point, human interaction has to be brought back in. Great questions have to be asked, and new ways. Let's and think about the grant writing. New ways are going to have to come up with ways to see who's the best if everybody's using AI, right? So I think there is, when I think about IT support, we're never going to lose the human interaction, because when the moment you do that and you allow AI to take over, I don't know one person that just really loves calling on the phone and listening to an AI bot trying to get through a prompt, let alone tier one tech support, right? And I really feel like that's the human interaction, the people who can maintain that, but you leverage AI to make their weaknesses, great, are the ones that's going to be most successful. And I think there will be a course correction. AI will go so far, and then we will pivot as a result to that in some way. And I think it'll happen a lot faster because AI is fast. And I think there will be obvious things will become so obvious that right away that, man, and I kind of attributed that to cybersecurity as well. And I did ask, we talked about that last time we had spoken, and cybersecurity comes up in a lot of conversations weekly for me, and a lot of people admit that they don't have it fully dialed in. And for remote first companies, it's just a real exposure point, especially with AI. What's, in your opinion, what's one thing every remote team should be doing right now, even if they're small, to protect themselves?
Yeah, I mean, the most basic is just really good password hygiene. I mean, that's just so dumb. But I don't think it always gets done. I mean, I was involved in a company where the CEO fell to a phishing attack and ended up giving up his password to an outsider. And, we never knew exactly how much information was lost. We don't think it was a lot, but how do you know, right? I mean, arguably, if you go back to what was it, the 2016 election, right? Hillary Clinton's campaign fell in part because of a phishing attack that was successful. So, really just simple like password hygiene. I really, I would love to see a service that just does occasional pressure testing that you can subscribe to for a small business. When I was at the university, every couple of months you'd get an email that, looked on its face to be pretty reasonable. And it was a simulated phishing attack to see if you get sucked in. And you got told if you messed up. And I think that would be a valuable service for any small company. Um, one thing we've done with my family, I listened to a podcast recently by a guy named Evan Ratliff called Shell Game. And a lot of it, he did 2 seasons now. And the first season was all about AI voice agents. And he ends up cloning his own voice and using it to call his family and his friends. And of course, scammers are doing that already, right? If they get a voice sample, you and I on this podcast, that'll be more than enough voice sample for both of us. They can make an AI voice agent and call our loved ones and try to get access to bank accounts and other things. So over Christmas, I had my whole family here and we sat down and we agreed on a family code word. If anybody calls you that sounds like one of us and they need access, you don't give them a thing until you hear that code word. And everybody needs to do that. And organizations need to do that as well, not just families. But yeah, no, you're the expert, Jake. Tell me, what do we need to be doing better?
It's funny that you were talking about the phishing emails. That's something that we did create and we do send monthly. Typically when I'm talking to clients, I said, hey, if there's somebody that you want to get make fun of in your company meeting, send them a phishing email and track when they click on something. And then, I still have a new sales guy that I pick on that I'm trying to get him to click on something that he shouldn't. But what comes after is what's really helpful is the quick remediation training, right? Showing them, looking at the leak, looking at the sender. They're getting really good in the fact that they have the ability to basically mimic a domain, but go off from one letter, to where if you glanced over it, you would think, oh, that's totally, the same company, same person. And even now, the link exposure, we had an event not too long ago where one of our clients got sent an email from their vendor. The email actually was legitimate. However, they clicked on a link and our tools on the web browser blocked them because it was a no malicious website. She just thought it was download an invoice. And so she put a ticket there. It's like, hey, you guys are blocking this. I need to put my Microsoft login so I can get this invoice and pay it. And come to find out, once our security team investigated, they actually realized that, that the email from their vendor was actually hacked. And we were able to work with their and log data. So there's instances like this, from an email, business email compromise is up over 80% last year. I would say that's probably one of the biggest threats right now. If you're not having somebody monitor your email inbox activity, even just, we can even tell where you're logging in from. So if you're, you said you're from Durham, if you're normally logging in from your email from Durham, we can tell that if there's another login from another location. We can tell when a threat actor gets in and they start creating all these mailboxes and rules and start sending out way more email than what Bill Walker usually sends out, right? And so there's a lot of tools out there for email that are stepping the game up, that I think that, the email for a lot of people, their business is out of that, and that's your reputation on the line. So I think that's probably the one thing I would say is securing your email. And then, but you have to have a response team, and you don't have someone designated in your company that's out looking out for cybersecurity. You definitely need to, look at an MSP or an MSSP at that point. And a lot of times, the budget and when do you start that? And typically I see people around 5 or 10 people, they start looking at it because it starts real, right? And so you start operational drags, another one of those things where setting up machines, giving people access, things like trainings. Those are really some of the things that an MSP could help with, that we help with, right? So yeah, that's a great question, and I'm glad you asked that, because that's what I talk to people about every week. So appreciate that. And I think the next thing I'd like to talk to you about is kind of a real work, the real work of leading a distributed team, and that's culture. And you talked about culture last time me and you talked, and I get a sense that culture for you is not just a word; it's something you actively engineer. And like you mentioned, you set up founder equity that vests over 4 years, and you build a clause in where the two founders can remove the third without a clause, and that's bold, right? And but another thing that really stood out to me was just your policy around ideas, and I think that's another culture thing, right? So someone's pitching an idea, it stops being called by their name, right? It just becomes the blue widget or whatever, right?
Yeah.
uh, the team owns it from there, right?
Let me give a little context to that, Jake, because that came from experiences I had in prior startups where I just watched everybody keeping score. You know, today I got to go home and I got to make sure I had more winning ideas than Jake had. Otherwise, Jake's winning. And I watched people doing that constantly, and it was exhausting because people weren't focused on solving the problem. They were focused on making sure they got credit. And I talk about people. It's kind of like two people that you might work with in your career. There's the people who want to make sure that their idea wins, and then there's the people who want to make sure the best idea wins. And what I've tried to do is think really consciously about how you bring a team so that everybody cares about the best idea winning. And it's not, it's really easy to say, oh, this is all just bad actors, right? People with big egos, they're terrible. There are those, and I've had the misfortune to work with some of those. But even good people who have their ego in check can get sucked into this. So the example I gave you when we talked earlier, imagine you and I are in a team meeting and you come up with this idea that may or may not solve one of the problems we have at hand. Now, if we spend the next week, and that's always referred to as Jake's idea, then two things are naturally going to happen. One, you're going to try to defend it. You may not want to. You may come to think it's a stupid idea, but it's now tied to you. It's Jake's idea. And if its stock falls, your stock falls a little bit with it, right? And if its stock rises, your stock rises a little bit with it. So you end up getting shackled to it. And that means you're kind of out of the game. Or worse yet, you're on the wrong side of the table. Now, what we do is we kind of have a policy that you're going to get an attaboy. That was clever, Jake. I think that's really cool. But by tomorrow, it's not Jake's idea. We're not going to refer to that. We're going to call it the blue widget, like you said. And that's very intentional because that means that if that idea goes south, it's separated from you. Your stock didn't go down. That's just idea that just failed. The idea didn't work. That's fine. Ideas don't work. And if it works, you'll probably get remembered for having a say in it. But frankly, the solution works. That's the key. That's what we're trying to get to. We're trying to get to a win. So, that's one of our key cultural elements. I have learned in my experience that when you focus more on process, you tend to get better outcome. And when you focus exclusively on outcome, you tend to have sloppy process, which means your outcomes aren't that good. And I don't mean like, Six Sigma on every single problem. I just mean being thoughtful about what you're doing and being careful and making sure you're thinking through the implications of your actions. We have, we spent a good bit of time getting very explicit about our values. And I'll just give you an example of one of them. Pressure is a privilege. So Tim Higgins, our head of engineering, comes from a military family, and his dad and his brother are both Air Force Special Forces guys, and they know pressure. And Tim grew up with that, and pressure doesn't scare him. Pressure is a privilege. And we believe that. We believe that if we are in a position in life where we get to try to create a technology that will save tens of thousands of people's lives, that's a gift. We're in a special place, and we should relish that. We shouldn't be afraid of it. So that's one of our things that we come back to all again and again. But probably, our most foundational belief is just integrity. If I tell you I'm going to do a thing, I'm going to do that thing. Now, that doesn't mean the situation can change, and when it does, we can agree to go in a different direction. But if the situation is still the same, and I've made a commitment to you, that's going to be followed through on. My good friend Andy and my good friend Kevin Lennox, who's a 2-star admiral in our Navy now, when he was the commander of the USS Nimitz, one of the values on all over the ship was integrity, doing the right thing when nobody's watching. And it's just that simple. And that's what we expect. Don't ever cut corners. Do it right. Do it always right. So every time we hire a new person, we do an all hands meeting and we talk about our values. And everybody talks about their values. I don't stand up in front of the room with a whiteboard. We all talk about them because we really want them embedded in every single person. And, part of that leads to a culture where we call each other out. If I make a mistake, and I don't mean like just, oh, I divided by 2, I should have divided by 3. I mean, like if I do something that's counter, I get called out and I should get called out. And it goes in all directions. And what's amazing about this team is if you make a mistake, that person gets called out. Inevitably, that person thanks the person who called them out for it. Always, every time. And that's just that's the magic. It's a joy coming to work with this team every day. I don't have a crystal ball. I think we're going to succeed. I think we're going to solve our problems. I can't be sure, but I can be sure that we will do our best, and I'll enjoy doing it every day.
One thing I noticed with high performing teams where they have a set of values and they're killing it is burnout. And what do? You're performing at a high level. Everybody's delivering. Everybody's coming through with integrity and they're killing it. And they're doing a great job. And there's mistakes, but they're fixing it. And you guys are achieving what you need to move the business forward, and for the mission. But at some point life happens. At some point, there's burnout. And just tell me what do you do personally? And then is there anything that the company can do to help with that?
I think the first thing I'll say is that when I look at my career, and I have burned out a couple times, really pretty severely in different organizations at different parts of my life. They were not driven by the work; they were driven by the people. The burnout came because I got tired of being gaslit, being undercut, being misled, dealing with politics as opposed to the problem. When I look at the 2 hardest times in my life professionally, they were both times where the people were causing me a lot of anxiety and a lot of trouble, not the problems, not the situation. So to me, actually, integrity and high performance is a great antidote to burnout. Now, that being said, showing up every day, I mean, the analogy I use with our team all the time, we are going to win the NBA championship. That is what we are doing. We are assembling the best team. And I don't use the NFL because those are much bigger teams. We're a much smaller team than that. We are going to assemble the very best team. And we want to be an all-star team. And that means coming in every day and playing your best, playing hard, pushing yourself. For some of our teams, Tim's antidote to burnout is he gets to think about the problem a little differently at night than he does during the day. Like that's where he is in his career. For me, I have built some discipline to fully disengage for a part of the time. I don't think my team loves it, but I come home and I usually don't look at Slack at night. I usually tune out completely. I spend time with my wife. I take the dog on an hour-long walk at night. A couple days a week, I'm up at 6, riding the bike for an hour. I have had to learn for my own well-being to really draw some lines, but that allows me when I'm on the field to be 100% instead of being 50% all the time, which I think that burns you out. I think you're better off going in and working intensely for 8, 9 hours a day, 10 hours a day, and then being totally shut down for a while. And that's what works for me.
And I love that. And I think that, taking care of yourself and having boundaries and all of that's super important. Something I've learned as well. Let's talk about leadership. And, you've sold, 2 out of your first 3 companies. That's pretty rare, but you said it came with real cost, right? Friendships that, didn't survive it, tough dynamics with co-founders. What did each of those experiences teach you about, who do you want to build with and how do you vet that now before you even ever sign the paperwork?
Yeah. Yeah. So, just to rewind from where we were, I founded my first company in grad school. I founded 2 other companies while I was a professor at UVA, and we were fortunate enough to sell both of those companies. One is still existent and has products sold on 2 continents, which is, as an engineer, that's kind of like the biggest gift you ever get, right? You architected a product that helps patients half the world. But there was real sadness in those. I founded all of those companies with people I considered my friends, and I think if you brought any of those people on the podcast, they would not tell you today that they're my friend. Maybe one would or two would, but most of them would say absolutely not. I can't stand that guy. And I look back on it, and it was really easy to blame that on other people at the beginning. And the more mature I've gotten, the more I realized what I held in that. And part of it was I wasn't explicit enough about my expectations, about what I thought it was going to mean to build a company with someone. I thought we were all going to be willing to sacrifice quite a lot in other parts of our life to make this happen. And other people didn't necessarily. I thought, I knew exactly what I wanted out of those companies, and I don't think the other people did, or we weren't aligned on. So a lot of what I do right now is I just try to touch my leadership team a lot and make sure we're aligned and where we're trying to go. And that sounds so dumb, right? Why would you embark on a multi-year mission with somebody and you don't know what the mission is? But I think when you're a young founder and you're exuberant, you just assume everybody wants what you want. And that is just not true. The biggest lesson for me, if I look over the last decade of my life, I got this lovely gift. I was a student at Duke. I did my undergrad and my PhD here. As an undergrad, I had a lot of scholarship money. And it was not because I was the smartest kid at Duke. That was absolutely not the case. But I was one of the poorest kids at Duke, and that was absolutely the case. I always felt I owed a debt to the university. So in 2016, I came back, and I was going to lead entrepreneurship for the School of Engineering, which I did. And very quickly, we ended up getting a large endowment for an undergraduate scholarship program to create the next generation of engineering leaders. And it was all for kids with high financial need who showed a propensity for leadership. And as we got this sort of close to setting up, the development officer, Jim Ruth, who helped write the proposal, sat down with me and he said, Bill, all this leadership stuff, we really need help if we're going to do it best in class. And I agreed with him, and we reached out to the student leadership office, which was headed by a guy named David Pittman at that point in time. And we spent a lot of time with David, and David was a great, I don't know if he'd call himself a coach to me, but he was a coach to me. And, he said, look, all I know is if you want to be a great leader, you have to be able to be humble and vulnerable. And vulnerability was not a thing that I was very good at. I was a kid who grew up in a pretty messed up family. I was fortunate my grandmother pulled me out of the fire, but I went through a lot as a kid, some neglect and some abuse, and a very severely mentally ill mother. And that wasn't a story that I wanted to hide. And because of what I'd been through, I constantly needed to prove myself. And every situation, I had to prove that I was the smartest guy in the room, that I was going to get it done before anybody else could get it done. And I can only imagine how tedious that was for other people. And so, David really said, look, Bill, if you want these kids to reach their potential, they need to learn how to be vulnerable. And I said, oh, okay, David, good principle. I like that in principle. How are we going to do that? And he said, well, they need a role model. They need someone to show them how that's done. And I said, I agree, David. That sounds like a fine idea. How are we going to do that? He said, well, you're the director of the program. It's you or nobody. I said, oh, I don't know, David. This does not sound like a good idea at all anymore. But we spent a lot of time. And for the first class of kids that came in the fall of 2017, they were on campus 2 hours. And then we all sat together in a closed room. I told them my life story front to back, warts and all. And I cried. I had never told anybody my whole life story before. And I am so grateful that David helped me find the courage to do that, because that was such I became whole. I stopped seeing those things as failures or damage or whatever the hell I had thought they were. And I just saw them as great survival. And I had powered through, and I'd found a way to survive and be happy and healthy through it all. And so I don't even remember the question we started with, Jake, but when it comes to leadership, my core position is I'm going to be open with people. I'm going to show them my flaws. I try hard not to say, I know, I'm sure, this is how it's going to be. I try to say, this is what I think. I may or may not be right. What do you think? And what I find is, I actually had lunch yesterday with a bunch of my students, and they said, "How do you handle not being the CEO? I mean, you're such a strong leader. How do you handle somebody else making the decisions?" And I said, "Who told you somebody else makes the decisions?" He says, "Well, how do you make decisions?" I said, "Well, we have 4 people on the leadership team. We make decisions by consensus." He said, "No, no, no. How do you vote with 4 people? How do you break ties?" I said, "You're not understanding. We make decisions by consensus." And we do. We've had disagreements. We've not had one as a leadership team that we couldn't come through and agree upon consensus how to go forward. And I think that's quite unique, and it speaks really highly of the character of the people I'm lucky enough to work with.
Yeah. To kind of recap on the question, obviously you're going through these experiences and also your life experience. And, if you were to start a brand new company tomorrow, how would you vet, those people now? Because you mentioned these great people you're working with now, but how would you vet them and before you ever sign the paperwork?
Yeah. So the first thing is be humble enough to know no matter how well you vet them, you'll get something wrong. So build out escape hatches. That's why even founders vest over 4 years in my world. That's why founders can be removed in my world, because even with the best vetting in the world, you'll get things wrong because people act differently when they sit in different seats, right? You know the old saying, a person who's not nice to the waiter is not a nice person. Right. And that's the there are people who without authority can be very pleasant, and then with authority they can be very awful. But when I look to vet people, I kind of want to know a little bit about their life experience. Not so much that they have to have had bad trauma or whatever, but I kind of want to know like where they've been, what they've seen, what lessons they took from it. Everything has a lesson if you look at it closely enough. My favorite interview question, and I feel bad giving this away because it's I found it so valuable, but Jake, if you were interviewing with me for a position, one of my first questions would be, Jake, I want to hear about the first job you ever had that paid money. And you're going to say, you don't mean mowing the lawn for the old man that lived next door. And I'm going to say, oh, Jake, I want to know all about that. I want to know all about that. And it's actually a really good character test. I had one guy who I interviewed once who ended up being a phenomenal engineer for me. His first paying job is he was a little league umpire, and he was 14, and he had parents yelling at him about his calls, and he found a way to navigate that. And I thought, well, this guy's if at 14 he can navigate that stress, he's not going to be bothered by this stress. If he could call a ball as a ball, I know that he's gonna be able to handle me really well. That in that same era, a couple years later, I interviewed a young woman for an engineering internship role, and I asked her the same question, and she said, "Oh, it was at McDonald's." And I said, "Well, tell me what that was like." And she said, "It was wonderful. It was so great." I said, "Really?" "Oh yeah, everybody was terrific." And Jake, it took me 10 minutes with her for her to admit that sometimes customers and managers at McDonald's might be unpleasant to you. And I thought, I don't want this woman around because what happens when she breaks an instrument, which we all do? What happens when an experiment goes haywire, which it always does? If she can't admit to me that working at McDonald's is kind of unpleasant, and I worked in restaurants, by the way, so I know. How can I trust her to tell me anything else? So a lot of that is sort of I kind of look for the brutal honesty, not the like negativity. I don't mean that. I just mean being able to see both sides of the coin. That is kind of one of my core things. And then I've decided that, going forward, my interview is going to be about like in a corporate setting, what do you value? I do like to ask people what they love about their last job and what they hate about their last job. And that's usually telling also. And if people won't tell you one of those, if they won't tell you anything they loved or they won't tell you anything they hated, they're not going to be a good balanced, like full worldview kind of employee or partner.
Man, brilliant. I'm actually going to steal a couple of his. Sorry, Bill.
That's okay. That's okay. I'll let you know where to send the royalty check.
Okay. I'm going to tell you, man, I just hired the best employee of my life, and it was on those questions now.
That would be great. I would love to hear that. I would love to hear that.
Last time we talked, you mentioned getting into stoicism, and you were saying, you had like four virtues. You said courage, discipline, justice, and wisdom. And you gave a great example about courage. And, going back, you mentioned the restaurant. That kind of what prompted me. Going back to the restaurant, after 5 years and finally introducing yourself to the woman who you served the whole time, right? Why does something that small matter to you as a leader?
Oh, I think most of our life is the little things. I actually think anything you ever dream to do big, you do by doing little things. And so, for me, this woman was, this is a restaurant down the block from my office. I go there maybe once a week for lunch. I have been for years. Same woman always serves me, always greets me with a smile, always pleasant. But man, the window to introduce yourself probably passed 4 years ago, right? I'm well beyond it would be awkward to introduce yourself. And as I was reading about Stoicism and listening and thinking about it, I just thought, this is a small moment to apply real courage. I have to do something that feels really awkward. And I'll do it because it's good for me. It's a good exercise of that muscle and it'll make it stronger. And so I was there and I just introduced myself. And she was ecstatic. She loved it. She introduced herself, and we were kind of old friends in a way. We just didn't know each other's names. But I walk in now, she greets me by name. It's like, you're almost old enough to have watched Cheers growing up, but I kind of feel like Norm walking into the bar, right? And it's this lovely thing, and it's both a small step and a huge step. I think anytime you're courageous, it's actually a huge step. It's actually a hard thing to do. And it made me feel stronger. It made me feel more self-possessed. So I loved it. My coworkers would say, "Bill, courage is not your problem. You're constantly telling us what we're doing wrong and what we need to do better." And that doesn't require courage for me. That's automatic. Courage is about doing the things that are hard. That's courage. One of the things that another side that's really fascinated me about the discipline idea of stoicism, and sometimes it's called temperance, but we think about temperance as alcohol. So it's discipline is a little bit of an easier word, but it doesn't just mean doing more and working harder. It's also the discipline to stop. So for me, it actually takes discipline to not work at night. It takes discipline to set that aside for a while. It takes discipline to not ride the bike until I puke, because my normal thing, my wife jokes that my philosophy is anything worth doing is worth overdoing. And she's not wrong. And so for me, discipline means stopping before I get to that level. Um, so, and then you go into justice. And I think, we can look for justice in big ways around the world, which are hard to touch, but we can look at justice in small ways, which is, for me, implicit in justice is respect. Whether it's respect for the people that work with me and acknowledging that they do jobs that I'm not good at. Not only do I not like them, but I'm also not good at them. And acknowledging and valuing that. But it's also, making eye contact with the homeless person on the street who because we give to the food bank, I'm not going to give money to, but that doesn't mean they're not human and they don't warrant being treated as such. And then wisdom, I'm reminded of this phenomenal interview I heard about Mike Tyson many years ago, and Mike Tyson was asked about the Evander Holyfield fight where he bit his ear, and how did that happen? And Tyson said, I should have never been there. I wasn't in a good position to be in that fight. I wasn't in condition for that fight. And they said, well, why? How did you get there? And he said, I wasn't humble. I lacked humility. And the interviewer looks at Tyson and says, are you humble now? And he said that was the first time in the whole interview Tyson looked angry. And he said nobody who's humble could think they were. And I think nobody who's wise could think they were wise. I think seeking wisdom is it's just a perpetual challenge, but a really healthy one. So yeah, stoicism has been my kind of thing to learn and grow on this year, and it's served me well, uh, and helps me. I think it's really about being a better version of who I want to be.
Love that. I think we all can take something from that. And I know that anybody that's listening to the podcast probably is working on something personally. And I just love how you're defining the goals and you're, going after these items I feel like everybody would want to stand for. Right. So, you mentioned some of the struggles you had, when you're younger. And I always like to ask the question for people is, on the podcast, when you were younger, obviously you were going through hardship, so maybe it would have been difficult, but there may be in times when you dreamed about what you were going to do when you grew up. And, did you think that you'd be doing what you're doing right now when you were younger? And kind of what was your thought process, and maybe what would you even, tell your young self about where you are now, and what advice would you give them?
Well, you're bringing tears to my eyes, Jake. Yeah, that's powerful for me. So, when I was about 10 years old, my parents had divorced. I was living alone with my mother, and my mother had a schizophrenic break. She abducted me. She took me out of school for a few weeks. Ultimately, she was arrested and placed in a mental hospital. I was living with she sent me to live with my cousins. I mean, she didn't have a lot of say, but that was what was in her will. So I lived with her first cousin and her children. And it was completely disruptive to me as a little kid. But I remembered, and again, we're a little different age. I'm just a little older, but there was the talk show of all talk shows was the Merv Griffin show. And Merv Griffin had everybody and anybody on. And I would lay awake in bed at night, and I would imagine being on his show, and he would look at me and he would say, "So, with everything you've been through, how did you get through it all?" And I would just shrug and humbly say, "I don't know. I just did it." And I think that helped me survive. I came to see myself as a survivor, not a victim, and that carried me for a lot of years until I actually learned how to get well. It helped me just grind out surviving life and grind out unhappiness. But I think that fantasy, more than anything I did as a kid for myself, helped me see myself as somebody who would end up on top. Um, the real credit goes to my grandmother, who took me in, and it goes to my high school teacher and mentor, Louise Radak, who helped me get into college. It goes to my undergraduate advisor, Howard Clark, who helped me get a scholarship to stay for grad school. It goes to my grad school PhD mentor, Greg Trahey, who, just helped me learn how to grow up to be a kind man. I didn't have any role models for that. But the little boy knew something somehow and was able to give himself a winning story that I was able to somehow live up to. So where I am, I never could have imagined, but I did somehow imagine I'd end up okay.
Man, that's powerful. You got to respect the grind, and you got to respect the fact that, you just kept going.
You reach a point in your life where hopefully you've survived the worst, and then you realize what got you there won't get you where you want to go. And then there's a healing phase. And my healing phase was a lot of years. But I couldn't have known I needed to get there if I couldn't have gotten somewhere first.
Do you feel like that experience when you were younger has helped you be the father that you wanted to be to your daughters now?
I think so. What's fascinating is I told the story about telling the Clark Scholars my life journey. I had never told my kids that journey. I had never even told my wife that whole journey. She knew pieces, but never in one sitting. And I decided after I did that was a real outrage that my own daughters didn't know the whole story. And they would tell you they know where they were sitting and what they were doing when I sat them down and told them that story. It was important to them. And I'm proud that I developed the courage to be able to share that with them. And I think we're all very close. They don't just know me as a father; they know me as a person, and I know them as people, not just as my daughters. And that is, of all the things I've ever done in my life, that is the greatest fortune that I've ever had.
Wow. And I just feel like that you as a person, you're just your mission, your goal right now with Boundless Science is just to help people, and and can we talk about the device that you're working on right now? That's I want to zoom out and talk about that mission, and you're working on that a replacement for a device right now that kills half the patients who go on it because it's hard to manage, and you're entering first trials of the year, and what does success look like for Boundless Science, and what does it mean personally to you to get this right?
Yeah, so let me talk about the problem. So if you remember, Jake, during COVID, a patient who got sick with COVID, they go to the hospital, and the first thing they do is they put them on oxygen. And that helps some patients. But if that didn't do it, then they put you on a ventilator. And a ventilator is basically a machine that breathes for you. It pushes air into your lungs and pulls air back out of your lungs. And that didn't work great for COVID for most of the patients. If things were still not going well, the last resort was a device called ECMO. And the easiest way to think about ECMO is it's an artificial lung outside the body. So ECMO is it's a set of hollow fiber membranes. So think about little tiny tubes. Gas flows through, blood flows across those tubes, and the gas goes from the blood, from the tubes into the blood. Oxygen goes into the blood, and carbon dioxide comes out of the blood. Um, the problem with this device is those oxygenators, they have a huge area of plastic, foreign surface, and that makes your blood want to clot. So what you have to do is you have to give those patients a lot of anticoagulant drug. And if you give them too much, they bleed to death. And if you give them too little, they clot to death. So literally about half the patients that go on ECMO will die on ECMO. So this was one of the problems Andy presented to me when we founded this company. He said, look, ECMO is unchanged for decades. It's the outcomes are very poor. It's a treatment of last resort, but there's got to be a better way. And so our approach in a nutshell is that we got rid of the hollow fibers. We got rid of the membrane. Instead, we use a liquid. It's a perfluorocarbon liquid. And these liquids are kind of magical. They carry a ton of gas, and they're not soluble in the blood. They don't dissolve into blood. If you think oil and water hate each other, I can't convince you how much perfluorocarbon and blood hate each other. So we basically run the blood through this liquid, and then we recollect it and pump it back into the patient. We believe, and data and time will tell, but we believe that this has a potential to reduce that 50% mortality down to maybe 10% mortality. And that'll not only help the 20,000 patients a year treated by this, but it'll help a lot more patients get treated because it'll be a safer approach. You called it right, Jake, when you said, I care about helping people. There's a reason I'm a biomedical engineer and not an electrical engineer or some other kind of engineer. My fundamental driver is I want to help people. I want to make people well. I want to help people live longer lives and enjoy more time with the people they love. And it's pretty simple. That's what we're about. That's what we're trying to do. I'm friends with Bill Hawkins, who's the former CEO of Medtronic. And Bill has a saying. He says, if you do good, you'll do well. And I believe that. We're trying to do good. And I think if we do good, it'll all work out. Obviously, there's a million ways to mess it up, even if you do good, but we have a pretty seasoned team. So I think from a business standpoint, we won't make any obvious mistakes. And from a technical standpoint, we're going to do the best job we can to make something that's safe and effective.
For leaders listening right now, especially the ones who are maybe starting to think about going remote, and maybe who are already distributed and struggling to hold it together, what's one thing that you wish someone would have told you before you got started?
I'll tell you something that I knew when we got started that I think I learned over COVID. It is easy, relatively speaking, to maintain trust remotely when you've already built it. It's hard to build trust remotely when you don't have it. To me, trust is the basis of all success from a team. All right. At the end of the day, if I don't trust you, Jake, we can't get anywhere. I used to tell my students, like, why do we have an honor code in college? Why do we? Because if I can't trust you, I can't teach you. And I said, consider the alternative. If you think your professors are lying to you, how can you learn anything from them? And the same is true of your coworkers, right? I've been in corrosive environments where I ceased trusting people. If you can't trust the people you work with, I don't know how you can get anything done. And I think really, if you've got a remote team, you got to think really hard about how you're going to build and maintain trust. And I was lucky. I mean, I've known Tim since he started his career as an intern with me at my last company. I've known Andy since we're 18 years old and we founded the company together. Andy's worked with Tess for 25 years, starting in the same city. So we have trust. We started with that. That's probably our greatest asset. But if you're starting with a remote team, that's got to be your main focus. And I think to do that, you've got to have some face time and you got to have some real heartfelt conversations about who you are as people. I was just listening to another podcast, which led to a conversation with my daughter, who's a philosophy major, about the 3 kinds of friendship. So this goes back to Aristotle. And Aristotle talks about 3 kinds of friendships. And he has friendships of utility, and that's your neighbor who helps you when you work on your car because he's good with cars. Friendships of pleasure, that's your buddy who likes to go to the football game with you, and you guys cheer on the same team and you have a great time together. And then friendships of virtue, where you share the same values and you believe in the same things. And I think we can carry the same thing over to the workplace. You know, we have people that are fun to work with. We have people who get the crap done that needs to get done. But then we have the people who we know we can trust to do it right, to be honest, to share our values. And so I would be looking at, how do you validate that you share the same values and how do you reinforce those values? I think if you do that, the rest is it's not easy, but it's bounded risk. If you don't do that part, the bottom could fall at any time.
Bill, I feel like we could talk for hours. I feel like we just, scratch the surface here. I really appreciate you being here and sharing your story and sharing the story behind Boundless Science. And before I let you go, where can people find you? If someone's listening and they want to connect with you and follow what you're building at Boundless Science, where should they go?
Yeah, well, there's only one Boundless Science on LinkedIn. So go find that or search for me. It's Bill Walker. If you search for me with Bill Walker and Boundless Science on LinkedIn, you'll find me, and feel free to send me a note and tell me what you thought of this.
And hey, if you're running a remote or hybrid team and you're dealing with device management, onboarding, offboarding, IT policies, or just trying to get your tech structure to actually work for a distributed workforce, reach out to Creative IT. That's what we do. We help remote first companies get the right systems in place so their people can do their best work from anywhere. And you can find us at creativeit.com. Thanks again to Bill, and thanks to all of you for tuning in, and we'll see you in the next one.
Jake, thank you so much. It was a great conversation.
Thanks.
Remote First Innovators podcast requires more than a conversation. It takes action, research, and collective wisdom. If today's episode resonated with you, we'd love to hear your insights. Join the conversation and help us shape the future together. We'll be back with more stories, strategies, and real-world solutions that are making a difference for everyone. In the meantime, be sure to subscribe, rate, write a review, and share it with someone you think would benefit from it too. Thanks for listening, and we'll see you on the next episode.